A little closer. Good evening. Okay. Good to see you all. Not seeing you there, but good to know you there. I would like to start with telling a story. It's about a monk in a temple in a bigger city in San Francisco. And one day this monk got an email and was pretty upset, annoyed, angry about this email. And because they were practicing the Paramitas, he thought, oh, that's a good opportunity to practice patience, for example. So he tried, and it didn't really work. So he got more agitated and more angry. So he thought, well, let's try something else. And so he went into the feeling, into the annoyance, into the anger, and made it bigger. He infused it, so to speak. And imagined what he would do if he could live it out. And he became a wild tiger, killing everyone, tearing everything apart. By this practice, there was some alleviation. This monk had some fun and some joy with this imagination. And at the end, he was actually able to do the practice good monks do in this kind of temples. So he was able to breathe with the anger and able to watch it. And that went on for the day. The whole story is about 24 hours. So he did his work, and at noon service he still was somewhat annoyed and angry, and these thoughts came up again and again. And he did his afternoon tasks. And then he sat in the afternoon, and he hoped that by sitting something will change. But it didn't. After Zazen, he was the same annoyed and angry and agitated monk. And then after dinner, he was on dish shift. So he really angry and annoyed did the dishes with a lot of energy, which felt quite good, and did some more alleviation. Yeah. And still he was feeling annoyed and feeling angry, and different thoughts kept coming up. So he went to sleep, and fortunately he slept well. And next morning he went to Zazen and tried again. And very intentionally tried to stay very close to the breath and the body, while also carefully watching to those thoughts. And during that period of Zazen, there a couple of new associative thoughts showed up, which you could say made the picture a little bigger and led to some understanding what was actually going on. So now, to that story you can apply the paramitas. The first attempt to apply one of the paramitas didn't really work, and I think, looking back, I guess the monk wasn't really kind and kind enough to apply the paramita of patience in a way that it would not be kind of suppressive or controlling. So at that moment he was not ready to do that. So instead he gave himself to the feeling, or you could also say he gave the feeling to himself and infused it, made it bigger, so he could feel it better, could see it clearer, could see the how much it was. And then over those 24 hours he practiced ethical conduct and patience, in the sense that he didn't act out on it. He could have just wrote a mail back and kind of annoyance and expressed his annoyance or his anger, or could have done something else, and he refrained from that. And that, to my mind, is patience and ethics, morality. Don't harm people just because you're feeling what you feel. And of course, over the whole day, trying to be with it is also practice of patience. And then the next morning, I would say there was a clear intention, which is also a form of energy. When we turn towards something with a very clear intention, we give it energy. And by that, concentration arose, and fortunately enough, something showed up, something could become clear. And the kind of understanding you could call is the paramita of wisdom. So these things, I think, happen quite frequently to all of us, right? We get annoyed at something, or we are happy about something, or we whatever. That happens all the time. Yeah. We are sentient beings, so we have feelings, and this is always a great opportunity to practice. It doesn't have to be a kind of so-called negative feeling. You can do it with positive feelings also. Usually we are not so inclined to do it with joy or happiness, because usually we are kind of content with joy and happiness. We don't look more deeply. But we could. And there are some suggestions to do that. So, having applied the paramitas to that story, I also like to give a kind of a psychotherapeutic, psychodynamic, you could say, appliance to that story and make a kind of process out of that. The start is pretty much the same, not acting on it is a very good advice also in psychotherapy. And then trying to make it bigger and feel it better is also a very standard thing in psychotherapy. It just makes it easier to understand in the end. But when I started talking, I felt, oh, there's something missing, and to make a kind of psychotherapeutic process out of it, I need to tell you the story which came up during that period of zazen. So this, and it didn't come up in the way I'm telling it right now. It was basically about associative thoughts and feelings, which then I could make a story out of it, or this monk. So when this monk was two years old, his parents had a gardening, and they were both working very hard and long hours in the gardening. And he was put in a playpen. And one day he actually climbed out of it and started to explore what was around him. The only problem with that was that there was a big highway not far away. So when his parents saw that he was gone, they were really kind of shocked and afraid and looked all over the place. And his father and then saw him and went up to him and slapped him and brought him back to his place. And from that on, the fence would be higher, so he couldn't climb out. So for a 2-year-old, this was rather painful. His need for being close to his parents and his needs to be supported in exploring the world were hurt. And so he felt the pain and was sad and got angry and annoyed and all this stuff. So when this monk got the mail, he, without being conscious of it, was reminded and remembered that story and some other things, I guess. But his psychic system decided that this was too unpleasant to really feel consciously. So there were some defense mechanisms going on, like suppression, or let's see, I wrote them down so I don't forget them. Affect isolation is one thing. Affect is actually a term for emotion. And that means, the suppression is pretty easy. The monk got the mail and got angry, but didn't get why, right? So that was not conscious. And he got only one feeling, kind of the anger part. All the other feelings and the whole other story was not conscious. So one emotion was isolated. So to keep the rest unconscious. And affect shift is also very common. Now, the anger wasn't directed towards his parent at that moment, but towards maybe the person who wrote the mail or the institution or whatever. So the emotion got shifted towards something or someone else. And this is all in the service to keep the real story and most of the real feelings unconscious. But by infusing the feeling, by staying close to what was happening inside, these defense mechanisms got loosened step by step. Their grip was not that strict or hard anymore. By the time in the morning then, so something else could show up. And what I would like to stress, and where I feel or think those two ways applying the paramitas or a psychodynamic process to that story, which are important, are, and so their psychotherapy and our practice is pretty much on the same page. The first thing is try to feel it as good and as best and as complete as you can. If you have only half of the feelings, half of the story, it's very hard to understand it, and in the end to let go of something. The second important thing is not acting out. According to the Paramitas, this is, like I said, ethical conduct and patience, you can say. But also the psychotherapeutic notion is, if you start acting out those things, just write a mail, create another conflict with a different person, it's just so much harder then to stay with this process and to actually realize what's really going on. You just have another layer of defense by creating outer conflicts. And the third thing I like to stress is, and this is maybe a notion which is not so explicit in our training most of the times, but we all experienced it, I think, a lot of times, is the notion of mourning and grieving before you can let go of something. In the psychoanalytic tradition of psychotherapy, this is, you can say, the key point of the process. If you're not able to grieve for whatever happened earlier on or just a couple of days ago, it's actually almost impossible to let it go. And when we sit, we all experience zazen periods where we had deep sadness or even cried and mourned for something. But we don't usually speak about these things so much. It's like, okay, usually I heard people say, well, some more experienced people to some newcomer, oh, the first 3 years you will just cry. So it's like some notion people have about our practice. The first time, the first years maybe, you will cry a lot on your cushion. Yeah? And by some bewildered looks I get, that might not be the case for all of us. I did, actually. I cried a lot for the first years. Not all periods and not all sessions, of course, but I mourned and grieved quite a bit on the cushion. And I'm also saying that story because from the perspective of a psychotherapist, I can, almost every day, I can see how hard it is for people to let go of their suffering, at least of a part of it, to understand it and to let go of it when they're not able to grieve, to feel the sadness, to feel the pain, whatever it might be. And of course, you can also apply the Genjo Koan to this story, right? I mean, it's like study the way, study the self, forget the self. This is all in there, yeah. I mean, to look at yourself closely for, this was a story about 24 hours, but actually we do it all day long, if things go well, is to study the self. And then if you dive into what the moment presents, it might be a feeling, might be thoughts, might be a combination. If you completely dive into it, you forget the self. You're just that feeling or thought, right? And if you're able to let go of whatever happened which led to that situation, to that perception, then usually something clears up, something becomes more spacious, and you can see things, right? They are just there. You don't have to go there. They just come, or maybe a better word, they just be without you doing anything. And you can just perceive them, which is kind of joyous in itself. And when we stay there long enough, or it's not about time actually, but let me say it like this, when we stay there long enough, when we are able to sustain this kind of awareness, sometimes body and mind drop up. It's just gone. Maybe for a shorter period of time, sometimes a longer period of time. You know. Our usual ways of constructing the world, of kind of identifying with words and stories and with notions of self is just gone for that time. Okay, so far this story. So let's speak about meditation or concentration or absorption a little bit. This is the 5th paramita. Rapp, in his book about the 6 paramitas, started this part with a koan, and it's a kind of famous koan. And the famous monk comes to Yunmen and asks, "What is the teaching of a whole lifetime?" And Yunmen replied, "An appropriate response." So how do we do appropriate responses? You know, about meditation you could say innumerable things, and there are whole libraries about it, and you can start by very technical things, breathing and posture, and this is, I think, more than good and helpful. But there's, in our tradition, also a different way to think about it. And this is something like that. Just focus on your intention to help all beings, to free all beings, knowing that there are no beings, no persons, no souls, and no other things. I mean, this is the Diamond Sutra, right? That's what Buddha told us, how to be a bodhisattva. Just keep this thought always close to yourself. And this is kind of a different notion of meditation, right? And I was curious about how Rapp will phrase it, and he actually, his way to say this was that meditation or concentration, absorption, in our tradition, to his mind, is an awareness that is open, undistracted, flexible, and calm. You could also say, well, it's like coming back to the nature of mind, which to a very revered Tibetan teacher, Kalu Rinpoche, the nature of mind is open, clear, and connected. So to return to that nature of mind by applying our intention to save all beings, knowing that there are no other beings. That's a way to define meditation. And then, when I say this, you all know, well, but what about my mind? When I sit down, there's one thought after the other, right? What about that? What about all of my discursive thoughts, which I hold so dear to me? Well, be kind to them. Let them be. There's not so much you can do about them. I mean, you can try to fight them, or can be annoyed about the fact that they are there, or you can try to control them, you can do many things with them. But in the end, most of us know that don't help. They will keep coming up. There's a book called Open the Hand of Thought. And I think this is a nice picture to say it, right? Usually we, without even noticing and not even being conscious about it, we grasp our thoughts, our ideas about the world and ourselves. We are really like this most of the times. And this is not like special, extraordinary things. This is just like, okay, there's the bus, there's the car, there's my cushion. What happened to my cushion? I have a different cushion now, and so forth. It's just things we see, things we hear. We already made concepts out of it before we know it. Even a sound, it's hard to hear a sound, to really hear a sound. Our brain locates the sound, and this is already a concept, right? It's already applying something extra to that sound. But it's very hard not to do. It's almost impossible. So this also says this might not be the core problem. We will have thoughts, we will continue to conceptualize the world, but can we let our thoughts just be the thoughts and know that they're not real? Know that we don't have to believe them, don't have to invite them for tea, don't have to fight them or control them. And when you set a lot, this can be hard work. Because they are very persistent. Our sense of self is really, really persistent and is fighting for its life. It doesn't want to go away. It's so important. And yet, and that's the good news, and this is one aspect of practice which is very important. If we repeat just being upright, breathing, and holding those things without leaning towards them or leaning backwards or sidewards, just noticing them, staying close to what's happening, they are not a big problem actually. But this needs, I think, this needs intention. This needs kind of an heroic effort. Rep likes to speak about heroic practices. And it's kind of heroic to be a bodhisattva and say, well, I will save all beings. And second, I know that there are no beings. This is pretty far off. But this is our vow. This is what keeps us moving. This is what makes it possible to sit there for hours and just be happy, annoyed, experience pain, whatever, restlessness, to just be with that all. You would not do that without this vow, without this intention and this aspiration. Or, well, it's just very hard if you try. Okay. There's another story Rep has in the chapter about meditation. And it's about a yogi, Bahia, who travels to the Buddha to ask him a question. Bahia was a kind of renowned and very established yogi, but the story goes when he was by himself, he had a doubt. He had doubts about his practice. And so a deity came and said, well, there actually is someone you can go to and ask. So he went to the Buddha. And he met the Buddha when the Buddha was begging for food in the morning, and he had to ask 3 times because the Buddha 3 times said, well, this is not a good time, I like to beg for food now, I'm hungry. Please come back later. But Bahia insisted and said, well, we both don't know if I'm still alive this afternoon, so please give me the teaching now. And so the Buddha did. And this is what the Buddha taught Bahia. Herein, Bahia, you should train yourself thus. In the seen will be merely what is seen. In the heard will be merely what is heard. In the sensed will be merely what is sensed. In the cognized will be merely what is cognized. In this way you should train yourself, Bahia. When, Bahia, for you in the seen is merely what is seen, and so forth, till in the cognized is merely what is cognized, then, Bahia, you will not be with it. When, Bahia, you are not with that, then, Bahia, you will not be in that. When, Bahia, you are not in that, then, Bahia, you will be neither here nor beyond, nor in between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. So when things are just themselves, when we are able to see them, when the mirrored things come forth, and we are able to sit there witnessing them, enjoying them, then the impulse to grasp things or turn away from things is almost not present anymore. And knowing that this also means there is no inside, no outside. There's nothing in and outside of us. Nothing which separates us. When you put those two together, this is the end of suffering. Then you know. And Dogen's take on that is, as far as I can see, this is always true. We are always this. We are always Buddha. We are always, this is always so close to us, there's actually no way that it could be any different. But this is something you have to experience and then know. There are all those funny stories about animals being raised by different animals, like a lion is, for whatever reason, is raised within a sheep herd, right? And so by growing up, he thinks he's a sheep. Then at one point, another lion comes along and is kind of like, what are you doing here? Well, I'm a sheep. And the other lion, no, come on. And drags him to the next pond and says, look, our pictures. We are the same. I'm a lion, you're a lion. So I'm Buddha, you're Buddha. It's not so much, there's not so much practice there, you just have to believe and know it. It's, this lion, how shall he practice lion? He's already a lion, right? We are already Buddha, so can we know it? Do we trust it? Okay, I have much more here, but I will stop. And if you have questions, I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions. I think Kay will bring the mic.
You talked about I guess the Buddhist Zen way of approaching your anger, and you talked about the psychotherapy way of approaching your anger. Which of those 2 approaches do you prefer?
Well, I did them both at the same time. I couldn't say, and there are not 2 ways of approaching it. I just told the story and then laid kind of upon the 5 paramitas, and then I laid upon the story a kind of a psychodynamic explanation. But what I did was still the same. There's just different ways to talk about it and to explain it. And yes, I like infusing those feelings because I feel, well, that makes it much easier to, in the end, to get around it.
You talked about the importance of grieving to let things go. But what happens when the grief, when the reason for the grief is ongoing? When like trauma continues, right? Like I'm thinking of war and its ongoing nature, and I feel like bodies sort of desensitize at a certain point and like check out. Do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, the word grief or might sound that you do this and then there's an end and then you're done, right? You let go and then it's done. But sometimes you just feel feel the pain ongoing, and I think you can do both: feel the pain and kind of grieve for it, but you might not come to an end saying, well, this is the end of that specific kind of pain. So you just continue feeling the pain. But I would also say one part of the practice could be to see how you feel the pain, how you are grieving or mourning. Because of course everyone is very different in his, her or their way to do it. And that might tell you something about yourself. And with traumas is actually pretty special, you know. When someone is traumatized and the reason for the traumatizing is still ongoing, you would actually not treat this person. So it's actually very hard, because when there's still, let's say, the reason why you are traumatized is still around, you're still with that guy, for example, which beat you up, then there's no way you can open up to that pain, which means you have to kind of give up some of your defense mechanisms and make yourself vulnerable, and this doesn't make no sense at all in this kind of a situation. So also grieving and mourning will not happen at that point. Yeah. But this is a very specific situation. So that's why we always try to bring people out of the situation and make very clear that this is the most important thing first they have to do, and then still pretty often that doesn't work. And then you can just witness, which is painful. Any more questions? Okay. Thank you very much.